Hello, everybody. My name is Jim Farmer. I'm the festival director of Out on Film, Atlanta's LGBTQ Film Festival. This is our 37th year, and we have some amazing programs. One of our favorite documentaries this year is Join the Club. I'm so excited to share this film with our audiences. I'm going to read a description of the film, and then we're going to have a conversation with the co-directors. Dennis Peron is San Francisco's biggest pot dealer, but when the AIDS epidemic sweeps through his community, Peron realizes that marijuana is more than a good time, it's medicine. In the wake of his lover's death, he opens the Cannabis Buyers Club, a five-story dispensary complete with rainbow murals, drag shows, and doctors on site. Law enforcement launched a multi-million-dollar investigation into the club, but Peron has an even larger aspirations, writing a landmark political initiative and leading the fight for change. Following the life of Dennis Peron, Join the Club uncovers the queer history of marijuana legalization in America. The co-directors of this film are Chris O'Connell and Kip Andersen. Thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us,
Absolutely.
Jim.
What made you two want to make this documentary?
Um, should we pause it?
I don't think you can go. Why don't you start? It's
Yeah,
your
I start.
story.
I don't know if I was. Did I start, Jim?
Yeah, whichever. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, well, actually, I have a very personal attachment and experience with this film because way back in 1997, I actually opened with a small group of us, one of, if not the first, legal cannabis clubs after 215 passed. And we had to ask permission from Dennis Peron if he'd
Okay.
grant us. That's how he was kind of like he was the godfather of all that. Everything had to go through him. He was so well respected that if you open a club, we had to ask him. So I lived a lot of this that you see in the film, part of it. It's always
Yeah.
wanted to tell a story.
Yeah. I mean, Kip told me his story, and he was like serving, he had the Tenderloin district was his district in San Francisco and serving some of the most kind of devastated of the communities during the AIDS crisis. And, he had kind of been talking to me about this about, oh, geez, we started talking about this 5, 6 years ago and told me the story. I started doing a deep dive into Dennis and was like, will you let me take this project on with you? Because it was such a like fascinating story and it was just really wild. Like Dennis was a wild character and we were lucky enough to meet him and record his last interviews before his death. So that was how we kicked it all off. And yeah, it's been a wild ride.
Dennis is, I mean, he had such a remarkable life. It was so varied. He did so much. But can you talk just a little bit about his life before Cannabis Buyers Club?
Yeah, sure. Well, Dennis was like grew up gay in New York,
Hmm.
where it wasn't, acceptable at that time,
Yeah.
kind of closeted, and went to join the military. And actually, sorry, no, he was drafted, so he didn't even want to go. So they shipped him to Vietnam in that era. Didn't want to go, and he had his first, experience with another man there. He saw his first dead body. There was a part in I think we touched on it in the film, but he talks about it a lot in his memoirs and to me personally, where they were trying to give him a gun, he's like, I'm not taking the gun. I'm not shooting Vietnamese people. So they sentenced him to work in the morgue and he
Hmm.
had never like seen a dead person before. And obviously there was like thousands that month. And I think that experience was so traumatic for him. He like came back and like did the complete opposite and just became like a super flower child
Hmm.
weed dealer. And that is where he got his start into the weed dealing business is he brought back a few pounds of pot from Vietnam and quickly became like San Francisco's biggest drug dealer. And, he was very influential early on because of Harvey Milk. They became friends and he was very influential in local politics and always covering his back and making friends with the DAs, dropping off bags of cash at the mayor's office. He told me he used to drop off bags of cash to Dianne Feinstein when she was mayor. So he was able to exercise a certain amount of control and respect in the city, starting in the 70s, and then proceeding on all the way through the 90s. But that, yeah, I think that Vietnam experience, growing up New York, closeted, I think it had like tremendous impact on him as a human and really spawned his drive to like take care of people, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah. So when the AIDS epidemic came around, it made Dennis realize that marijuana wasn't just about having a good time. It was also medicine, healing as well. Can you sort of talk about that element and how that sort of propelled him forward?
Yeah, I mean, at the
Yeah.
time, we're getting good at Chris.
Well, I was just gonna say I'll let you talk about the palliative stuff and like and the care because you were there. But as Terrence Allen put it in the film, like it was just simply like because those AIDS drugs were so gnarly in the beginning, and if you could keep some weight on, you could live, and like if you smoke pot, you can generally eat and tolerate food and keep a little weight on and make it through, right? And a lot of people attribute like because of the delivery mechanism, right? Like you're not taking a pill, you're smoking something, so you're able to feel better quicker. And I met, dozens and dozens of people that attribute like their health span or making it through even the AIDS crisis, HIV positive and not dying because of marijuana.
I will ask Kip this question. Kip, can you sort of talk about the trajectory of the Cannabis Buyers Club from sort of an underground presence here and there to something that was a very public place?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was very underground, just basically in his apartment in like Lower Haight Castro area. And as it built, this film is not only about Dennis, but it's about his cohorts, like a motley crew of just incredible characters, Brownie Mary, and I mean, I could go on and on. And as it grew, his notoriety kind of grew, and so he had to go to the next place that was even bigger. It was very nearby, across from the Vaughns, if anyone's been there. And then eventually he got this massive four-story place on Market Street, on Maine's Market Street. Like you can't hide it. And he purposely at that point he was very frontal. He confronted. He rather than running away from the police and the government, he was like, "Hey, challenge, like, good luck. Come get us," because he knew how to manipulate the media and how to use it for the benefit of his movement like no other. He was a magician. So at that time, he played the media like a symphony. And so at that time, he purposely got a lot of energy towards him. And since it was so legitimate, when you go in there, there's so many people who are, you can visually see, they're dying of not only AIDS and cancer and other ailments. That time, it really was the first time, public ABC or like 2020 came to visit them. And then he was the one who brought it to the entire America. The concept of medical marijuana. No one even put those two words together. And so at that time, it was the concept was brought into the entire country, and it planted a seed. It took a while, and then here we are today. But he specifically was the one who did it, and through his magic of playing the media in a fun way, and that's what a big part of the film that we show.
Yeah. Chris, can you sort of talk about Dennis's run-ins with the law during that time?
Yeah, I mean, it was constant. It was constant since he was like, as soon as he started selling pot, he was running in with the law. And it was like the same kind of group of characters too. It was like Greg Corrales, who was a police chief, eventually. When he first started out as a low-level cop, he was chasing Dennis. They were chasing each other, or yeah, he was evading Greg Corrales for 20 years, right? So it's really interesting. And like during the filming of this, I became friends with Greg Corrales, who like, and Joe Bannon, who was the gay cop that like kind of brought the whole thing down. And, as a filmmaker, you kind of like, you want to hear both sides. We interviewed Dan Lundgren, who people thought was like Darth Vader, who was like the most evil man in existence. And like, really, he was doing what he thought was best. He was from a very conservative California background, he felt like he was upholding the law. I believe that he's a good person. Same with Joe Bannon. And a lot of people in the Castro to this day would disagree with me.
Mhm.
But so that was really interesting. And the whole cat and mouse game, I mean, Dennis was like genius with that. There was one time when they thought, because they could never find the money was a huge thing because he was making, $1 million a week was the estimate. I mean, serving 1,000 patients a day, and the weed prices were frankly really high back then.
Yeah.
So even in today's terms, it would be $1 million a week, and they couldn't find where that money was going for the life of them, and they were tracking it for years and years and years, and they thought they knew it was getting boxed up and shipped to New York in crates, and they busted him. They intercepted the crate, and it was just a rainbow flag, which was also that's kind of a side note. We didn't address that in the film, but Gilbert. I'm spacing his name, and I really shouldn't, but it's been a minute since I've talked to him. But the guy who made the rainbow flag, Gilbert, it's Gilbert, right? Anyway, um, they made the very first flag and brought it over to Dennis's house. So to hear those stories is like really cool. And he never trademarked the flag. He just wanted it to be used for like everyone. And so there's all these like things going on in the community and like San Francisco at the time. And yeah, I mean, the cat and mouse of the cops was like unbelievable. Like, and the amount of money. Um, One of the people that we interviewed said it was probably the most expensive investigation in California's history. They spent so much money on it and like recouped nothing, zero.
Wow.
And I will hit on what Kip said again. Like, I mean, Dennis coined the term medical marijuana. I think that's like a huge thing that gets overlooked in this society and like where it all came from. And that's what makes his story like super fascinating.
Yeah. Kip, I was watching the film again this morning. There was a line early on that really stood out for me. Um, I think Dennis says this is a club for secondary people. We are not going to shut down. Can you sort of talk about the Cannabis Club as not only a place for medicine and healing, but also for a tribe of people to come together that might not fit in elsewhere?
Yeah, it was unbelievable. And I was fortunate enough to actually be there. And when you walk in the doors, it's a celebration of life. It was something where, there's medicine, but then there's medicine of community and medicine of music and medicine of
Yeah.
performance and just being who you are. And so when you walk in, there's open arms and there's smoke all around, but it was just so much more of that. And especially at that time when I mean, this is, again, this is early on. And if you have HIV positive, you're just, and even, LGBTQ at the time, you just don't have a place where you can really be yourself. And this was one, it was just, just complete flamboyance and everyone in a full state of ecstasy joy. And that's a big part of what kept people alive until the drugs came. And so it was just, and then we show that in the film. And, we had hours of footage to show that luckily people were filming this with old VHS tapes. And that's some of the funnest parts of the film is seeing what went on there because it was just, it was like a cannabis rave at all times, but very therapeutic. You could just really see it, just a lot of love shown and a lot of, yeah, consulting. So it was beautiful.
Chris, I was reading an interview with Dennis in which she was asked if he saw similarities between those who tried to legalize marijuana and the gay rights movement. Do you have any thoughts on the similarities between those two?
Yeah, I do. I mean, they're quite similar. I love that this story ties them together.
Hmm.
But it's kind of like fighting for what's right from a social perspective in America. Like, it doesn't matter your sexual orientation, like, there shouldn't be laws against it, just in the same way that it doesn't matter. Alcohol kills what 75,000 people a year in America, not even like drunk driving or something like that, right? Not to mention the ongoing things that happen in the home, and even Joe Bannon said, he goes, in my 20 years of being a cop, I've never gone to a domestic abuse call where someone was high. Um, so why should that be illegal, right? And then you start getting into the prison lobby side of things and how much people make by there are still people getting imprisoned in some southern states right now for an ounce of marijuana, which we all live in states where it's legal, so we can't imagine this, but for 20 years. So costing us taxpayers 60 grand a year when we could have just maybe tried sending that person to Harvard, right? So that in itself is it's unjust, it's unfair, along with the gay rights movement. Although the gay rights movement, it in a way seemed to happen quicker almost. I know people have been fighting forever, and part of making this film was like learning about that fight. But we don't still have federally legal weed, which I think we will in the next few years. But yeah, there's a ton of similarity, and like to think that like a little queen from New York who lived in the Castro, this diminutive little elfin man, started this whole process in '96, and we're almost there. 30 years later is fascinating, right? And like I think if you're interested in any type of like fighting for what's right, it's not just a gay story, it's not just a weed story, but I guarantee like people that are really into marijuana probably haven't heard this story. So I think it's really like fun and important.
Yeah, I was going to ask Kip, why do you think Dennis's story isn't more widely known?
That's a good question. Because again, when I lived in this, I've been a filmmaker for a while. I always thought this story would be told, and it's a great question. It's just one is no one. He was a little bit recluse, Dennis, as he got older, and the story kind of he got so massive, and then he kind of retreated and just wasn't heard. And then the whole cannabis industry was the big story. CNN, there's always cannabis, cannabis, and I'm always watching like, why doesn't anyone know tell the truth? Because the root of the story is the most interesting part of it. And I think it just got covered up by just so much bling. And, we're at one point, we are going to start the film off with some, one of those cliche pot CEOs of a big pot company and driving his jet. And then we're just going to ask him, do you know how this got started and see if he knew. And that was going to be the start of it because it kind of got overtaken with just, the cannabis industry and money and business and that. So, it's a good question, but we're fortunate that it's finally starting to get out to honor the truth.
This is for either one of you. How long did you two work on this?
It was relatively some of my other films I've been. It was pretty quick actually. Like we did this, what did it the whole thing? I mean, it's all relatives depending on the filmmaker, but by the time we started filming, was it like 3 years? But majority of that was two.
Yeah, it was, we throw the COVID in there a little bit, but
Yeah,
man, I think we like shot our first, like very first interview in like the end of 18, and then we kind of like sat on it for a minute, and but I'd
yeah,
call it, 4 years of work. Um, and
yeah. It
we're
was an
still brushing it
adventure.
up to this day, right? Like it's been a 6 year kind of journey.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And in a way, we have all this footage from 1996. In a way, it's been a film in the making for the last 30 years because when they were filming back in the day, they knew that they were seeing something special. So it's nice to finally give that justice to these old VHS tapes.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that was kind of one of our most exciting scores was like happening into like these really, because when you're making an archival doc, the question is like, how do you make it fun and how do you make it exclusive?
Mhm.
And we stumbled into like some people who had like, big troves of like VHS tapes that we, then digitized and were able to get like that real, like raw, like 90s feel to it. And you're not going to see that anywhere else in any coverage of Dennis, from an archival perspective.
Exactly. All right, final question. What is Dennis's legacy?
I'll say one also, and then Chris, you can say, Dennis's legacy is one of a hero, one of that inspiration that one person can do a thing, the cliche that only takes a few people. Sometimes, it takes one person to have that spark, and he had a big cohort of team, like I said, a motley crew around him that supported him. But the inspiration of what one person can do with a deep drive and a purpose and a persistence the amount that he can do, I think that's the biggest legacy that you can make a massive difference if you really put your mind to it.
Okay. Okay, great. All right.
And yeah,
Chris, did you want to have anything?
No, I think that was well said. I think that
Okay.
was well said. I just
and
love I love the fact that people can make change And what I did learn in making this was like, you know, if you're trying to make change, like maybe in the digital world, is I think that it's probably pretty interesting to get out um in person and like march or, like show up to meetings in person is kind of what I learned. I think you can make like big change nowadays because no one does it anymore. Everyone's just hiding behind whatever. It's easier to, rally 20,000 on social media, but like a few hundred people at a local, town ordinance meeting or something where you're looking to change laws, like can actually change those laws. And it kind of got me thinking, well, if I ever want to, push something I would do it in person. So I think that was tremendously interesting to me is like how they did that and how they were, this is obviously pre social media, but I think that it has applications here and now in our society.
And one last thing too, the legacy of Dennis Peron in the LGBTQ movement, that I feel has been totally, passed up. I feel that's a whole part of it. And then also the cannabis one, both of those have kind of been covered up. If years down the road, he's going to be one of the forefront, heroes, I guess you'd say. So,
All righty. The film is Join the Club. It screens at Out on Film on Sunday, October the 6th at noon at the Midtown Arts Cinema, and then it's available as part of our virtual catalog as well. It is an extraordinary film, and I'm so glad that we're getting to show this. Co-directors Chris O'Connell, Kip Andersen, thank you so much for bringing this film to our attention and sharing with us. I can't wait to let our audience see it. And thank you, too, for talking to us today.
thank you so much. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Jim. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. It was nice to meet y'all.
Enjoy the show.
All right.
Thanks so much.